and welcome to a new series of video lectures, this time about legal, ethical, cultural and environmental concerns, starting with legislation. Now, this is not necessarily the most exciting part of the GCSE computer science specification, but if you do a bit of studying and can memorize the key points, you've got a really good chance of answering those questions well and picking up a lot of easy points in your exam. So starting with legislation, basic idea here is that the growth of computer technology has created many benefits, as we know. However, it has also introduced many new problems. So for example, the law has had to consider many new issues, such as hacking, malware, online fraud, software piracy, and even how to protect privacy in an era where everything is available online at the click of a button. Many of these activities have been criminalized by Acts of Parliament. So you have to remember, technology tends to run ahead of the law. We get new technology, benefits and problems, and then sometimes later the government, the law, has to sit down and try and think about how to prevent new crimes or protect people from problems caused by this new technology. And this is what we're going to be looking at in the course of this first video lecture. So for your GCSE course, you need to know about the following Acts of Parliament. We have the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. We have the Data Protection Act of 1998, which is also going to involve some discussion about the General Data Protection Regulation, which has just been launched in 2018, this year. You also have to know about the Copyright Design and Patents Act of 1988 and the Freedom of Information Act of the year 2000. So hopefully that sounds really exciting, and we'll go through it not in too much detail, but just enough to give you a bit of flavor to allow you to discuss it and elaborate on it and give the key points when you sit your exams. So we will start with the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. In the early days of computing and networks, hacking wasn't illegal. As you can imagine, this caused a lot of problems. People could commit computer crimes, hacking, stealing information, and that wasn't necessarily illegal. So as always, it takes the governments of the time a little bit of time to catch up with the technology and think about how to regulate these things. And this is what they did with the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. So the Computer Misuse Act created the following new offences, the following crimes. Unauthorized access to computer material. Unauthorized access with intent to commit or facilitate a crime. Unauthorized modification of computer material. Making, supplying, or obtaining anything which can be used in computer misuse offenses. So these are fairly broad in scope and cover a lot of the kind of computer crimes that we're familiar with. So because of this, hacking, creating or spreading viruses, or any other type of malicious software, stealing information for the purposes of blackmail, etc., are all now illegal in the UK. And of course, you can see the same keyword repeating over and over again, unauthorized access. If you're trying to gain access to a computer or a network and you don't have authorized access, it is automatically a crime, and that can result in you going to jail. In 2014, the Computer Misuse Act was amended to raise the prison sentence to up to 10 years. So before you think about doing some hacking just to try out your computer skills, remember, if this becomes a police matter, if it gets reported, you can go to jail for a long time. So be very careful. Moving on, let's look at the Data Protection Act of 1998. Databases on computer systems hold a huge amount of information about everybody in the country. Pretty much every man, woman, and child, you've got a huge amount of information that's available and stored digitally. To avoid misuse of this massive amount of data, the government passed the Data Protection Act in 1998. Usually we simplify Data Protection Act to DPA, Data Protection Act. The DPA sets out the requirements for the control of stored data about an individual and the rights of the individual to access, check, and correct this information. So this is actually really important because it's all about your right to access, check, and correct the data that's stored about you digitally on computer systems. Before this, a company could hold data about you and they could keep it secret. This information could be wrong, it could be misused, and it was very difficult for an individual to actually get access to change this information, to see what people held about you, and to fix any problems. Again, with most of these laws, it gets very complicated. But for the Data Protection Act, you really need to think about the 8 basic principles, what they mean, and that should do you okay for the exam. So let's have a look at these. First of all, data should be processed fairly and lawfully. That is, the data must not be obtained by deception, and the purpose for the data being collected should be revealed to the data subject. So the data subject is essentially the individual. That's you. So if somebody's obtaining a lot of data, they have to be honest about it and tell you why they're doing it. Number 2. Data should only be used for the purposes specified to the Data Protection Agency and should not be disclosed to other parties without the necessary permission. So people shouldn't be able to collect your data and just sell it on and give it away to other businesses, other companies, without your permission. The data collected should be relevant and not excessive. What does that mean? Well, your electricity company doesn't need to know your shoe size, or your sexual preference, or your favorite type of video game. That is not related to their job of being an electricity company. They shouldn't hold that kind of information about you on their database because it's excessive and it is clearly not relevant. Number 4, important. Data should be accurate and up to date. Pretty simple. The data they hold about you should be correct and it shouldn't be really old and out of date. Number 5. Data should only be kept for as long as necessary. So this is to avoid companies building up huge amounts of data that is no longer required, that then could be misused or stolen or passed on to somebody else. There's often a legal minimum amount of time people can keep certain data because they need to store it for legal purposes, but after that time has passed, data should no longer be kept, it should be deleted. Number 6. Individuals have the right to access data kept about them and should be able to check and update the data if necessary. So again, that's important because again, it's about you. You have the right to see the information these companies hold about you, and if it's wrong, if it needs to be updated, it needs to be done. So remember, prior to the DPA of 1998, this doesn't necessarily happen. Companies could have old, out-of-date, wrong information that they could keep secret from you. Number 7. Security must be in place to prevent unauthorized access to the data. So if you're a business, if you're an organization, you're keeping data about individuals, you need to be able to keep it safe. You need to take steps to make sure people who are unauthorized do not have access to it. So that might be within your own business. Why are cleaners accessing the database of customer information? It might be to stop people from outside your business gaining access to the data, for example, hackers. And finally, data may not be transferred outside of the EU unless the country that it's being transferred to has adequate data protection legislation that is the equivalent of the Data Protection Act. So that means a business can't just take your data in and then think, well, we want to do something a little bit dodgy with it, something that might break the Data Protection Act, so we'll just take that database and transfer it to another country, and then we can do whatever we want with it. If they do that, they are breaking the law, and they can get into a lot of trouble. The DPA means that each organization has what we call a data controller, and this person is responsible for the accuracy and security of the data kept. So this means any sort of business that's keeping data, so for example your school, university, private business, needs to have somebody who is a data controller, and their job is to make sure that the Data Protection Act is being followed. They must register with the Information Commissioner's Office. So you have to state what kind of information that you're going to keep. And then if there are any problems, an individual can complain to the Information Commissioner's Office. They can investigate and find out if the Data Protection Act is being broken. Breaking the DPA can be punished with a large fine or even a prison sentence. So then this is a law. The Data Protection Act is very serious. If a company is breaking this, if an individual in a company is breaking this, there can be a lot of fines and possibly even time in prison. Ultimately, the person who is the CEO or the owner of a business is ultimately responsible for making sure the Data Protection Act is followed. So you can't just say, somebody in my company wasn't following policy and the department head is responsible for that. The person in charge is ultimately responsible. They have to make sure that their employees are following the law. There are some exemptions to the Data Protection Act. So there are certain situations where the Data Protection Act does not apply for fairly good reasons. So for example, we have national security. Any data processed in relation to national security is exempt from the Act. So if you're being spied on by MI6 or MI5, you can't use the Data Protection Act to find out what information the spies have on you. Crime and taxation. Any data used to detect or prevent crime or to assist with the collection of taxes is exempt from the Act. So that's quite clear. Obviously, if you're a criminal, you don't want to be able to then go to the police and find out all their information they've been gathering about you for a criminal case. That's protected. Domestic purposes. Any data used solely for individual, family, or household use is exempt from the Act. So data that you have collected as part of your family, that is not included in the Data Protection Act. Families do not need data controllers. They do not need to register with the Information Commissioner people. Obviously, that makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, we're just going to move on a little bit and look at something related to this, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, which has just come into effect in 2018, which is when I'm recording this video. So if you're watching this in the future, hello future, hopefully things are all good. Now, this isn't specifically part of the GCSE computer science syllabus. However, it is connected to the Data Protection Act, so I'm going to cover it briefly just to kind of future-proof this video in case it's included a little later on. Feel free to skip it, but it does kind of update the Data Protection Act and maybe give you something more to talk about during your exam. So the DPA is a UK-based law. It's an Act of Parliament and is enforced in the UK. In 2018, a new regulation came into force that applies to the entire European Union, which includes Britain at the moment, and we call that the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. This is similar to the DPA, but includes some new rights, most famously the right to be forgotten, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail in a moment. So again, this can be summarized with 8 key principles. 8 seems to be the magic number for this series. So number 1, you have the right to be informed. Basically, companies need to explain why they're collecting data. The right of access. You have a right to see the data that people collect about you. The right to remedy. If the information is wrong, you can ask for it to be corrected, and they have to do it. The right to erasure. So this is what is sometimes referred to in the press as the right to be forgotten. This means that your personal data can be deleted by you if there's no good reason to have it. So for example, the data you have on social media, an embarrassing photograph at a party when you were 16, you have the right to tell a company that that should be deleted. Obviously, there may be reasons why companies need to keep this data. Again, certain types of data need to be kept by companies for a number of years because of certain laws. But if there's no legal reason that data needs to be kept, you have the right to say it can be deleted. The right to restrict processing. You can block data from being resold to third parties. So if one party collects data, they can't just say, oh, this might be useful for marketing purposes, we're going to sell it on to other people. They can't do this without your express permission. The right to data portability. You have the right to obtain your data and reuse it. So for example, if you're using one app or one service online, and there's a similar service out there that you want to use, you have the right to take your data, transfer it to another company, and then use it. Again, the idea, it is your data. A company can't just say, oh, well, now we have your data, we're going to keep it. No, we don't want to give it to anyone else. Your data, you're in charge, not them. The right to object. You can object to how your personal data is being processed. They're not doing it in the right way, they're doing something with it that you don't like, you have the right to say no. And number 8, right related to automated decision making, including profiling. So this means if a decision is made by an AI, artificial intelligence algorithm, you can insist on human intervention and or an explanation. And this is to avoid the sort of computer says no situation. So for example, you go to a bank, you apply for a loan or a mortgage. They feed the details into the computer. The algorithm says, no, don't give this person a loan. Now you can actually say, I want an explanation. I want a human to tell me what's going on, and I want a human to review this. Whereas before they might just say, sorry, computer says no, nothing we can do about it. We don't know why it's saying no. We can't overrule it. We just have to follow what the computer says. Now, you can ask for human intervention, you can ask for an explanation, and you can ask for it to be reviewed by a real person. And again, this is just to stop this kind of automated AI computer intelligence maybe profiling people, making unfair decisions where people don't have any recourse to a review. Now you do. All right, moving on from that, this is another act that you do need to know about for your exam. It's called the Freedom of Information Act in the year 2000. The purpose of this law is to provide the public with access to information held by public authorities. So for example, schools, hospitals, the government, local authorities, people like that. Public authorities are obliged to publish certain data about what they do. Members of the public can request information about the activities of public bodies. So basic things that the government and government departments are doing, you can request information on. They can't keep it secret unless they have a good reason. This act covers any recorded information held by public bodies, for example, government departments, local authorities, state schools, and the police. Journalists often use this to scrutinize the activities of public authorities. So again, if you're a journalist and you're worried about what the government is doing or what government departments are doing, you can request certain documents and certain papers. And again, you have to be given these unless there's a very good reason why they need to be kept sensitive. For example, ongoing criminal cases or terrorism or something like that. But generally, most documents created by the government can be made available to people because of the Freedom of Information Act. Again, it's all about making the government accountable to the people. Moving on, we've got the Copyright Design and Patents Act of 1988. I bet you thought it couldn't get any more exciting? Well, it's just about to. Computers and the web have made it very easy to copy material created by other people. For example, text, images, videos, and music. The CDPA, the Copyright Design and Patents Act, protects the intellectual property of an individual or an organization. It grants automatic copyright to anyone who has created creative work, whether physically or digitally. Under the Act, it is illegal to copy, modify, or distribute software or other intellectual property without the relevant permission. So that can be something as simple as copying and pasting some text from a web page, copying an image, downloading videos or music without permission. This act also covers video and audio where peer-to-peer streaming has had a significant impact on the income of the copyright holders. So again, using BitTorrent to download movies is illegal under this act. Most commercial software will come with a license specifying how the purchaser may use the product. In most cases, a license key will be required to access the software to prevent unauthorized copying and distribution. Remember, I didn't know is not an excuse in the eyes of the law. Even if you are ignorant of the law, it still applies to you. So you can't say, oh, I didn't know taking that picture was illegal, or oh, I thought that video was available for me to download on BitTorrent. I didn't know that it was protected by copyright. And no, sorry, you've broken the law. You can be punished. That's just how it is. So let's have a look at kind of something that's connected to the copyright laws, Creative Commons. Creative Commons, or CC, is an organization that issues licenses whereby the holders of the license can reserve copyright to parts of their work while allowing parts to be copyright free for others to modify as they choose. So this is a way that somebody can get protection from copyright law, but can also say, you know what, you can take this and you can do things with it artistically, you can pass it on in certain ways because I'm giving up partial control to the work that I've created so that other people can use it. Under such licenses, the author may choose to allow complete access for non-commercial use only, allowing redistribution of the work providing the user abides by certain conditions. So maybe you're a photographer and you've taken a lot of photographs and you can say, hey, you know what, for educational purposes or non-profit reasons, you can take my photograph and use it. But if you start selling it or using it to make money, no, that's not allowed. That's breaking my copyright. This form of license is often referred to as some rights reserved, as opposed to the CDPA's all rights reserved. So again, they still have some rights, but they're letting you have access to it in certain ways to give you some access to their creative work. For example, you might want to modify it or change it or use it in a class, use it for educational non-profit use, and that's okay. And the person who has the copyright authority is saying you can. And that's what we call Creative Commons. Okay guys, this has been quite a long, slightly dry video lecture. Let's just go through the key points of all of this. The Computer Misuse Act makes unauthorized access to computer material illegal. So basically, hacking is illegal because of the Computer Misuse Act. The Data Protection Act sets out the requirements for the control of stored data about individuals. The Freedom of Information Act allows the public to see data related to the activities of public authorities. The Copyright Designs and Patents Act protects the intellectual rights of individuals and organizations. And finally, the Creative Commons license allows the author to give up some of their rights to allow others to modify and redistribute it right at the end, my tongue is getting twisted up. Very sorry, tongue-tied. to allow others to modify and redistribute their work under certain conditions. Okay, so make sure you've studied that. Make sure you can discuss these briefly, and I will see you in the next video. Please like, please subscribe, and good luck with your studies.